Support WrestleTalk!
Give us a subscribe.
Malakai Black, AEW, and wrestling news. I think we probably better discuss all three, really. I am Luke Owen, DAD. I'm joined by Chopper Pete Cornell and your Jam That Champion Tempest. We are the Blackpool Content Club. Welcome to the WrestleTalk Podcast channel. If this is your first time here, please do press subscribe, give us a little thumbs up button and all of that good jazz as we discuss what is quite a, outside of the CM Punk stuff, maybe the heaviest topic that I think we've done on Content Club since we launched this show. Because this is a story that has been going on, I've tracked it back since August 31st. So
Crikey.
like the entirety of September essentially has been not dominated by the story because Brawl Out certainly covered a lot of the first couple of weeks. But this has been a new story that has been reported by various different sources, various different outlets, in various different ways, and has then been responded to by those directly involved in it, who have then called out those who have reported that news. So what I'm going to do to kind of kick things off is I'm going to try as briefly as I can go through a timeline of events, because I've got it all here. I've literally got like all the reports as well. So in case we need to refer back to anything, I can read stuff out. But as it stands, I just want to trying to get to us to our current day, but this might take a while, so please do bear with me. So August 31st is where I think this first started, and it's funny because the first, the September 1st report from Fightful Select is since Wednesday, which was August 31st, there have been countless AEW removes emerging from largely
unsubstantiated.
Thank you. Unsubstantiated accounts about a ton of releases and requests for release. And my first thought was, because I couldn't find the original source, and then I just had this brief moment, I was like, bet you it's zero news. So I had a quick Google.
More like zero sources.
Sure was. It was Zero News that reported that Malakai Black has asked for his AEW release and was granted it. Also told 4 people on total, I think they meant in total, have also been granted releases. So Fightful Select followed that up with that one of those unreliable relays Wednesday that Malakai Black has been released by AEW. Reps quickly shot down to Fightful as completely false, and he said he's not being released. Wrestling Inc.'s Raj Giri, who is reliable, also tweeted then deleted that Malakai Black had asked for his release and it wasn't granted. We'd heard the rumor within AEW rosters that Black had been unhappy, but the reason why wasn't something we could report without confirming firsthand. That is something that's going to come up a lot around this, because a lot of this story really does seem to revolve around Black's mental health.
Yes.
And the sort of any personal problems, which we're not going to go into here either, because Black has said, which we'll get to, he's trying to keep that private, as anyone would do. This was followed up on September 2nd by Mike Johnson, a PW insider, who said, "We can confirm that in speaking of sources close to Malakai Black, there has been a personal situation weighing heavily on him, and he's privately talked about taking a long, perhaps permanent break from professional wrestling in order to deal with these issues." Then we have All Out, which at the end of his 6-man tag, he gave a little kiss to the fans and he bowed on stage. And I was like, well, I guess maybe he is done with the company then. September 7th, Fightful Select. It looks like Malakai Black is effectively done with AEW for now. Fightful Select reported last week that Malakai Black had asked for his AEW release in August, but that request was not granted. AEW, in an official capacity, has told us the rumors that he was gone from the company weren't true, but it would seem they have changed their stance. Numerous talent informed us that they have been told that Malakai Black is done with the company for the foreseeable future, with many saying that he got his release. So we've got a lot of conflicting stuff already going on here. And then Black started being pulled from various different shows, replaced with different AEW talents. September 9th, Wrestling Observer, Malakai Black waved goodbye to the crowd after his match. Tony Khan wouldn't answer what that meant. There is believed to be, this is believed to be a personal situation that he is dealing with right now, and he has also pulled himself off independent shows. Khan had recently noted that Black had 4 years left on his contract. I just wanted to reiterate that because I think that is an important point that will come up later. It's not confirmed he was released upon asking to deal with the situation, but that is the word going round. Malakai's first comment on this was on Sunday the 18th at Prestige Wrestling, where he said, "I promise you this is not goodbye, it's more, we'll see each other soon." Yeah. He then went on to Instagram Live, where it put up a post on Instagram where he said, "I dislike reading parts of my private conversations between myself and AEW with regards to my mental well-being on the internet. These conversations were private, not meant to be shared with the public. As by now, most people realize I'm a very private person and do not feel the need to have stuff like this out on the internet. If you've been following me longer than a cup of coffee, you're aware I've spoken about them prior, but would like to be the one deciding when this finds its way to the public and not through someone else's mouth. As with anything through the lips of someone else, that story gets distorted. Secondly, to be in line with the above, they also need context. I did indeed ask for my release. The last 2 years of my life have led to a lot of setbacks. Both me and my wife have been affected by uncontrollable actions from outside that resulted in loss of life, medical setbacks, career jeopardizing, suicide of a close personal friend, and close family member almost losing their life, then experiencing an injury that I was sure was the end of my career. Lastly, I've read a few narratives online regarding my release, mental health, and my personal life that I can summarize swiftly. It didn't come from me. If it didn't come from me, it didn't happen. Stuff about my conditional release, stuff in my marriage, or using said mental health to leverage the other when I said as I said before, wasn't part of what was going on in the public conversations are false. My marriage is fine. I am fine. It's just going to take some time for things to say that way." Meltzer said on Wrestling Observer Radio, he wanted out of AEW. I guess we'll see what happens. Obviously, he wants to go back to WWE, and there's a lot of time left on his deal. I think 4.5 years left on his deal. So this is where I think one of the first times where I think that's a bad bit of reporting there.
I agree.
Of saying he obviously wants to go back to WWE, because I don't think that's fair. Friday the 23rd on the Wrestling Observer newsletter, Dave talks about how Black had been approached by WWE because there had been long-standing reports that WWE were reaching out to talents within AEW to ask them to come back, either try to get asked for their release from their contracts or when their deals are up. Malakai Black was one of them. FTR was another. Swerve Strickland were the other names. There have been internet rumors that it's also Adam Cole, Kyle O'Reilly, and Miro, but Fightful Select debunked those. However, FTR and Swerve Strickland appear to be actual cases. Swerve Strickland in the case of Hit Row. They asked if he could get his release from that so he can come back and be part of that group. FTR just looking to see what deal they could get once they are up. And Fightful Select noted, the Wrestling Observer noted that Malakai Black was contacted by WWE, and we heard from WWE sources over the past month he'd indicated to contacts in the company that he wished he was still there. As of now, he's effectively done with AEW, but with the inability to compete for WWE for an extended period. Several in AEW management were initially of the impression he wanted to go back to WWE. There were higher-ups in AEW that are of the if they want to go, let them mentality. So I've just go back slightly to the previous point when we said maybe Dave was slightly out of line. If this is also what Sean's been hearing, he has said, I have heard from WWE sources that, or from AEW sources, he wants to go back. I wonder if that is kind of what Dave was saying on Wrestling Observer Radio, just put it poorly.
Mm-hmm. I think so. And I mean, there's a lot of stuff that happens on Wrestling Observer Radio that is, it's a conversation, and it's a casual chat, which then people take as hardcore reports, quotes, etc. when maybe they're not the most fully formed or well-worded things, because it's Dave Meltzer. He can be a little rambly at times. Some people may say. He is. So
I feel like if you just listen, because I've been listening for like 20 plus years, I'm just used to it now.
Yeah, exactly. But I think, there's a lot of stuff that happens on Wrestling Observer Radio that can kind of be not necessarily misconstrued, but just aren't necessarily the most well thought out sentences for him to say out loud. But
yeah,
it's a radio show, so
I actually think that's an interesting topic for us to table and come back to later on in this conversation.
Yeah.
On top of all this, there's also the Buddy Matthews stuff.
Yeah.
Because Buddy Matthews said that he was taking time away, and Fightful Select reported, we weren't giving context as to whether or not Matthews was being released, but heard numerous times over the previous couple of months that he'd expressed dissatisfaction regarding his situation. Specifics of that are not yet known. One source contacted Fightful after the New York City tapings and said they believed it was Buddy's last night, but that also hasn't been confirmed. Buddy Matthews on Twitter said this was all false.
Mm-hmm.
Then Ryan Frederick on the Wrestling Observer board said the only guys that really want to go back are the WWE, that is, are the ones who have significant others with the other company, that being Buddy Matthews and Malakai Black.
Mm-hmm.
And presumably Andrade, but that's a separate topic.
Yeah, absolutely. On the 26th, Fightful Select reported that Malakai Black asking for his release had several higher-ups in AEW to think that he just wanted out to go to WWE, and he'd told at least one WWE talent that he wished he was still there. AEW officials also thought the situation had been smoothed out over before All Out. At least one AEW source believes that we'll end up seeing Buddy Matthews and Malakai Black back in AEW within a few months, and said that AEW had no intent of releasing Black to go elsewhere last month. Also around this time, Andrew Zarian had to shut down a Reddit thread that said he'd reported that Keith Lee, Swerve, FTR, and Miro were approached by WWE, but he had to say, I did not report that. Again, I think that's an interesting thing for us to table and come back to. Then we get to Malakai's response, which is long, but I feel like I need to read the thing in its entirety. If you guys don't mind. I just think it's fair, if we're going to talk about this, to have all the words in full.
For a bit of dynamic reporting, should we each take a section?
That's nice.
So it's, not
nice.
Just you talking the entire time.
I would really like that, actually.
Okay, great.
So, some people just can't seem to shut the F up and create things that are not there. So I have to go out here again and have a conversation with you guys. This is on Instagram Live, he did this. So guys, how many times do I have to tell people to not trust people that are not in this business? If you can't even get the years of my contract right, which is a very minuscule detail, then how are you expecting, or how many people expecting those guys to even know every intimate and private detail in regards to my private business? My contract's not 5 years. My contract's never been 5 years. This is all BS. It's all lies. So, I posted a statement, and you could, of course, all of you have read my statement, because even if you'd read my statement, it clearly reads that that my release is in quotation marks. Now, if you don't know what quotation means, it means that the author does not agree with said quote or said word choice. Also means it's not his wording. Then it's followed by a bunch of multiple other things in regards to my marital stuff, but it even says that stuff about my conditional release, and that is false. We'll pass across to you, Tempest, because then he talks about the death threats that he has received. Skip over. That's always bad.
Yep.
Tempest.
He goes on to say, I posted that statement as a summary for you to understand why I'd take some time off. Again, it's in the statement. It is in the statement. It's mind-boggling. If this isn't enough incentive for you to stop believing these people, then I don't know what it is. Because if you were a part of this whole mob that, like I said, sending me a bunch of hateful comments based on the words of someone else, then sorry, but you're dumb. You're stupid. Does anyone understand that in the time where I'm going through this stuff and I'm kind of dealing with a bunch of stuff in a very productive manner, that exactly doesn't help? And what I hate about it is that none of these dirt sheets will take responsibility. None of these guys will take accountability and say, oh, S word, we effed up. I'm sorry. We should have probably not said that. Oh, he's going through some stuff. Maybe we should not. Maybe we should not make all these baseless assumptions because, again, as it turns out, it's not true. None of it's true. Not one single thing of it is true.
He goes on to say, so again, if you were part of this mob that felt the need to send me death threats, well then, thank you dirt sheets, because they don't care about my mental health. They don't care about your mental health. They don't care about your feelings. They don't care about my wife. They don't care about my family. They don't give an S. All they want is dumb clicks with stuff that they're making up, because they're tying bridges between things that are no longer there. They're tying things that don't exist, because they want the narrative to exist. But again, I'm sure tomorrow there'll be a different narrative, and tomorrow it'll be, oh, we got the wrong information. Oh, we heard it from this. Don't blame us. We're just reporting. A real person would own up to their bull S. They will own up to their words and then say, you know what, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that. If the words come out of your mouth, then own it. Just own it. Anyway, I would like to very much go back to just working on my stuff, working on my private life, working on getting to the point of feeling good again. So I hope that this puts all this stuff to bed. I'm definitely not going to be on my social media for a while because, my God. Again, guys, stop believing these things. It is unbelievable. Anyway, I'll see you guys in a couple weeks, maybe a couple months. Like I said, I'm only taking some time off. That's it. Just taking time off. There's no conspiracy to this. Just taking some time off. All right, I will see you guys soon. Take care of yourself. Stop believing any other narrative. Right now, I debunked it. There's nothing going on. Don't believe these people. Don't write, don't believe it, nothing. I'm fine, I'm going to be fine, everything is fine. You'll see me right back with AEW pretty soon. I'm just going to take some time. That's it.
In response to that, because he then talks about
there's a bit more as well.
Yeah, he talks about the AEW versus WWE tribalism and how he doesn't want to be an instrument for that.
Yeah.
Which, again, I very much agree with. SRS Sean did have a response to this. He put up a Twitter thread that said, I'm not really going to talk more about the Malakai Black thing out of respect to him, but I want to say absolutely I care about the mental health of the performers that we cover. I never have and never will cover that aspect of their lives unless they outright ask me to. Black is one of my favorite performers, and it hurts to hear what he said. but he's absolutely within his right to feel that way. I certainly understand that if he says coverage wasn't accurate or fair, but we're always doing our best to improve, or ensure that. I wish we could cover nothing but positives, but unfortunately that's not realistic or sustainable. But we will never cover someone's mental health, pregnancy, private illnesses, personal relationship if we can help it, and everything's above board legally. Appreciate you all. My approach to this initially was defensive, as per usual, but thought better of it because that doesn't benefit anyone and is immature of me. I wish Malakai Black nothing but the best personally and professionally, as everyone deserves. Pete's left the room.
He has. Not entirely sure why. And don't really know how long we're supposed to wait for him to be back.
That's right.
But
it's however long a poo takes.
Presumably.
Yeah. Right, so that is everything. That is everything. That was everything that was reported, I would say, by reputable news sources. That being Dave Meltzer in Wrestling Observer. That is Sean Ross Sapp on Fightful Select. That is Mike Johnson of PW Insider. Hey, Pete.
Hello.
And those are like the people, I would say, the main ones who are reporting on this news that I would say are the credible news stories. I didn't see or find any other news stories that were talking specifically about his mental health or his marriage or anything like that. So perhaps there is more to this that I haven't seen. I didn't go deep into the woods on Reddit because I'd rather not at times. But let's first off just kind of give some thoughts about the story itself and Malakai's response to it. Tempest, I'll come to you first.
Gosh, I don't know how to give like a succinct answer to any of this.
Do you want me to go to Pete first then?
Well, I don't know that I'll be able to come up with one in the time that we have, because I think this is like a very nuanced topic with lots of layers to it. And like you said, I don't see in the reporting that we've seen and we've covered here, I don't see a lot of what Malakai Black is talking about in his responses to it. Now, I also know that this is the internet, and it's very easy to just take a line from either PW Insider's report or one of Sean's reports or anything, and then just tweet it out with a little hyphen, and you say, this is from this source, and that you don't link to the actual source, and you don't put the actual quote. And maybe that's what somebody ends up seeing. I'm not saying that that's the case here, but there is lots of that. There's a lot of just, broken telephone reporting going on social media.
I also think that's the case, just to add on to that. There is every chance here that what Malakai has seen in terms of this is how people are reporting it is what other people are telling him the reports are. So rather, he is not a Fightful Select subscriber. And if people are just messaging him on Twitter saying, like, Sean's saying you've got mental health issues and that's why you asked for your release. Like, if you're Malakai Black, then that's probably what you think Sean is reporting. The problem there is that that's media literacy on the part of the person who misread or has misattributed what Sean is reporting and is then relaying that back to Malakai Black.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, this is an issue, maybe a larger conversation just about wrestling media as a whole. Is that
which I really want to have.
Yeah, which is the fact that wrestling as a whole is so hush-hush, has so many secrets, and it's always been a very kind of closed off place to report on, because there's always secrets, there's always rumors, everything has to be close to the chest. No one likes to reveal anything about anything to do with wrestling. So all the reports that we get are saying, well, I have a source that says this, and we all just have to trust that that source is correct and that people aren't lying about having a source or not. And that is the entirety of wrestling reporting. That's the actual foundation of wrestling reporting, is saying, I have this source in this company that said this thing. And then we just have to trust, is that source reliable? We don't know, because we don't know who the source is, We can see who's reported it, but we don't know who they've spoken to get that information. And that is why it's kind of like inherently going to be a little bit, kind of like you said, like with the broken telephone stuff, is like, this person has told me this, I reported this, and then this other person has taken that information and extrapolated it out to be this other thing. And now you're like 3 steps removed from what the actual initial conversation was with the source.
Yeah.
And that can lead to a lot of misinformation. And especially when people see like one line that's been taken out of it, and then they fantasy book and extrapolate out from that one line to be like, well, I know the reason for this because I have an opinion about it.
Yeah.
And then they say, well, this has definitely happened because of this thing that I thought of, with no evidence of that. And then that gets extrapolated out, and then that can become truth in the internet wrestling community. You know,
Yeah.
people just see one thing about Bobby Fish saying that he's asked Adam Cole and Kyle O'Reilly to be released from AEW and come back to WWE, and that just became fact on the internet until Bobby Fish was like, no. And then people who actually do wrestling reporting, like Blackpool Content Club, were like, that didn't happen. But for a while, that was fact on the internet.
Yeah, it was that dark rumor. Like as Sean was actually pointing out, like that first Fightful Select report really is like there's a lot of rumors circulating around, and we don't really know where they're coming from. And what I find interesting that you made the point there is that when it comes to reporting things like Fightful Select or Meltzer, you know, they use the term "a source has told me." If we go back to that initial Zero News tweet that kind of kickstarted a lot of this, it was my source has told me.
Yeah.
And as far as we can tell, and as far as been pretty much proven, dude has no sources.
Yeah.
But because he has written it in the exact same way that a Sean would, or a Dave would, or a Mike would, it has the same kind of weight behind it, I suppose, in a way.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's a lot of people who are Zero News apologists who will say that, oh no, he does have sources, you're all wrong. When someone like a Sean Ross Sapp weighs in to say, this is provably false, here's why. And people go, no, Sean, you're wrong because they reported something before you and you're just jealous. And there's all this like tribalism about wrestling reporting, which is, to me, is baffling.
It's even more weird.
But whatever. But the fact there are the people who will just straight up lie. This is not the first time that this has happened. There are tons of things in wrestling history, people just lying about wrestling news and making up their own sources so they can get their name in the conversation of wrestling journalism. And people will just take that because you have to just accept to trust people. That's wrestling journalists.
Or that thing that we were talking about with Andrew Zarian on Reddit. Someone just put up a Reddit post that said Andrew Zarian of Wrestling Observer has said this.
Yeah.
And Andrew then asked him, be like, I never said this.
said that.
Problem is, if you don't see Andrew posting up on Twitter, I never said this, and you just read the thing on Reddit, all of a sudden the thing on Reddit becomes your statement of truth.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, it's a larger issue at that point about media literacy in general. And I know I've heard lots of people that I very much agree with say that media literacy needs to be taught in school, and because there's so much on social media in particular that is just nonsense. And if you don't have the thought to think more about it than just reading something and taking it at face value, and then that's fact to you, then it's very dangerous. And what we've seen here is I've got no love for this zero news fella because, again, look at everything that this is kind of cascaded into. And that's not to say that there aren't other pieces of this puzzle that Malakai Black is frustrated with, but it's just a lie.
Yeah.
Piss off.
Because there may be people who are watching this and be like, well, he did say that Malachi asked for his release, and that is in effect sort of what did happen. But Malakai Black clarified, like, I didn't really, I just asked for some time off. I put release in quotation marks. And Sean was saying, like, you know, we've heard sort of rumors and things like that. But Zero News, I'm just going to go back and reread exactly what they said. Malakai Black has asked for his release and was granted it. Also told 4 people in total have been granted their releases. So that's not
false.
That's
just
false.
Categorically incorrect.
That's not
a
false.
lie.
So I used to work in film coverage. Prior to this, I used to do a lot of movie film coverage stuff, and that was my trade, was reporting on news that was coming up from that. And again, like what with WrestleTalk and WrestleTalk.com does, aggregating news stories from elsewhere. I had some of my own exclusives and stuff. Fun fact for everyone, I exclusively revealed that Darth Vader was going to be in Rogue One.
Look at you.
I know, thank you very much. Got my name in the newspapers and everything.
Lovely
because
stuff.
Luke Owen of Liquor and Myth reported.
And that is exactly why people lie about their sources, because they want their name to be in the conversation.
You're absolutely right. I shouldn't have bragged about that.
Nope.
I'm setting a bad precedent. Right. But this happens a lot in film as well. Like we used to deal with a guy that used to post up a lot of fake nonsense about specifically the MCU. This was around like the time of when the first Avengers had just come out. So it was in that Phase 2 era. And he just made up like thing after thing after thing after thing. Most of it based on educated guesses of where the stories were heading or where movies were heading or characters that could appear. And because of some of his educated guesses being correct, because a lot of us also had those same educated guesses, he got a lot of credibility to the point where a lot of people thought that he was a legit and he had legit insider information. The fact of the matter is he didn't. He just made up a lot and guessed a lot and sometimes got it right, because a broken clock is right twice a day. And I think we see a lot of that in wrestling media as well. I'm seeing more of it now than I have done previously. But I am seeing a lot of parallels between this here with what I was seeing in MCU coverage in particular and DC coverage 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And it's bad.
It's bad.
It's real bad.
Very frustrating. And this is where different areas of my thought process start to converge and where I start to get frustrated at more different angles of it, because this is very, cut and dry, black and white. Don't do this. On the flip side of things, I also get very frustrated when it then becomes wrestling media and not one dipshit that can't do is just doing this for a laugh, because it's not trying to get clout or whatever the case may be. It's very frustrating to me to paint all of media with the same brush when Sean Ross Sapp has time and time again come out publicly and said, we will not report on people's mental health struggles or anything of that nature, and has stuck to that and has been 100% consistent on that. I don't appreciate him being lumped in with other people who do not give people that courtesy. And I think that is, again, generalizing people or labeling people it's a very dangerous thing to do on the flip side of this argument. And I don't appreciate that.
No, because I went through and I did read all of the Fightful Select reports about this. And I actually think that Sean was relatively balanced in everything that he said. Like, he even says, like you mentioned there, he has said on multiple occasions on various shows and in select posts and stuff, I'm not going to report on people's private matters because that's not the business I'm in. That's a TMZ sort of thing. That's not the business I run. But like, when you sort of read up about this fact stuff, like everything that Malachi has said in his Instagram post is more or less what Sean was saying. But Malachi has basically lumped all of the bad things together to just mean the dirt sheets are bad. Don't listen to anyone who doesn't work within this industry because everything they're saying is wrong. And the funny thing about that is that one of the things he really says is wrong on there is the length of his contract.
Yeah.
I wanted to get back to this point.
And who was the person that said the length of his contract?
Tony Khan.
Tony Khan.
Yeah.
Heard it from the horse's mouth.
Yeah. Like, if there's one person I'm going to believe knows the length of Malakai Black's contract, it's probably Tony Khan, the man who signed it.
Yeah.
So I can't quite fathom like why. Maybe he didn't realize it came from Tony and just assumed it's come from the dirt sheets. But even then, like, does he not know how long it is? Because I would assume Tony does.
And the thing with that is I can totally understand if Malakai's in, if he does have struggles or whatever he's dealing with right now, and being in that place of frustration and stress and just saying stuff and being like, you're all wrong, everything's fake, I don't care, just shut up, everyone shut up. I can totally understand why he's feeling that way and just said stuff.
Yeah, you're right.
Even if it came from Tony Khan, give him a pass on that one. Like, man's dealing with stuff.
I think you're absolutely right on that. Yeah, you're right. I was wrong on that one. You are right.
Yeah, and I think that is an element that sometimes gets lost in, I think, media and wrestling reporting as a whole. Is these are people's careers, and a lot of like their lives are being a wrestler, and that is their passion and their goal and their drive and everything. And when we speculate about who's going to be released or whatever, it's like that's someone's potential dream being crushed. That we are just we try to be balanced and try to do reports and not speculation when it comes to more serious stuff like that. But sometimes that line can be crossed in wrestling media reporting and being like, well, this person's asked for their release, it was denied or it was granted or whatever. And there could be a lot of moving parts happening behind the scenes that we are completely unaware of. And it's probably what Black is alluding to, is that I've had a lot of private conversations that are not being shared in the public, or some of them are, which I don't want them to be, and it's getting conflated with this is a bit of wrestling versus, no, this is my life. Don't speculate on my life. You know, I can totally understand the wrestler's perspective on this. I do agree with Tempest though, but that doesn't mean that you should then paint all of wrestling media as bad, because that's not true. There are varying degrees on the scale of wrestling reporting as to complete liars and people who are actually doing the work to report as good as they can in wrestling. In a very fast-paced and changing environment like wrestling, they're trying to be as accurate as they can and don't report things willy-nilly without backing it up with evidence first. People like Fightful Select.
Yeah, that is, to me, an important piece of all of this. And I just find it's very easy for, like, you know, Zero News in particular is just a Twitter icon. There's not a real name attached to that, you know, so I don't give them the same benefit of the doubt of just like, well, they're a human making these decisions and whatnot, because they're not putting that same reputation on the line like that.
No.
I agree that Malakai Black is a human first and a wrestler second, and I do take these frustrations and everything that he's said, you know, just with the grain of salt. This is someone who is, you know, someone who is upset.
Yeah.
I get that. I also feel similarly on the flip side of things where Sean is also a human.
Absolutely.
And in this case, I think Sean Ross Sapp has done nothing wrong. And it is irresponsible to then shift blame onto him.
Because
and not by name.
He's the one who has taken the brunt of this.
Yes, absolutely. And not by name, he hasn't called out Sean Ross Sapp, but lumping him in with the rest of wrestling media, I think is also very irresponsible. And I think it is just another level of media literacy that isn't being shown here. And I think all sides of this can learn and continue on from that. But obviously, like you said, I do take what Malachi has said with a grain of salt, but I don't completely absolve him either of damage that's being done from his words, you know, because yes, he's been wronged in all this, but you know, there are layers to this. Like, it's not a black and white issue.
And it's not, no, and it's kind of, it's people's reaction to reading news, I guess, in a way, because there are apparently, I mean, going by what Malakai Black said in his Instagram live thing, there are some people that heard the story that he asked for his AEW release or a conditional release or whatever it was worded as, you know, according to Malakai Black, it was just, I want to take some time off, and decided that their response to that was to send him death threats. Like, that is an insane leap to take, that a wrestler looked to take some time off from a company, so I have my only way to process that information is to send that person death threats online. Like that, I can't quite understand how you connect those two dots together. Similarly, then, when Malakai Black is on Instagram Live being like, everyone within the wrestling media is lying to you, those people then just go and attack Sean and send him abuse online as well. So, like, no one benefits from any of, like, people's reactions to this outside of the ones who I think are being more sensible about it, which is that I think people who have, like, a good sense of media literacy understand that wrestling news, like all news, is complicated. And there is things over here, there are things over there, and this is what we do. And I think, which kind of brings us to what we do. And I think it's very interesting to cover what we do, say as WrestleTalk, the WrestleTalk Podcast, WrestleTalk.com, but also, you know, other aggregator websites, Wrestling Inc., WrestleZone, all these sorts of places. We gather together stories that are reported by somewhere else, and we then say, this is what Fightful Select are reporting. This is what Dave Meltzer of the Wrestling Observer is reporting. This is what Mike Johnson of PW Insider is reporting, and this is what they say. So that's one element of it. And part B of that is what people understand what we do. Because... yeah,
I'm really glad you brought this up.
Yeah, because the amount of times... I mean, I've been with WrestleTalk now for 5+ years. The amount of times where I have been tagged on things saying that, you know, tagging wrestlers and things, saying that, oh, WrestleTalk are reporting that you're doing this. And I'm like, oh, I'm not saying that at all. I'm not a journalist. I'm not a reporter here. I'm just I'm a podcaster that talks about wrestling news and wrestling shows.
Yeah.
I didn't say this at all, but because I hosted the WrestleTalk News, where I have said Fightful Select have reported this, people have misconstrued that to be that I am reporting this.
This is exactly what happened with this exact story this week,
Yeah.
or whenever it was I did the news, when I said when we did a video last week that we said about the Malakai Black situation, saying that he'd been granted his conditional release from AEW, because that was what was reported at the time. He'd been granted his conditional release, and he's gone from AEW. The following week, we then had a video that was actually he's staying with AEW because the news has now changed. And I said, it's been reported that he'd been granted his conditional release, and this is all the things that were reported before, but it's actually different. New reports are saying that he's still with AEW, he's taking time away, but he's going to be back within a few months, because that's what the new Fightful Select report is saying. Several of the top comments of that video were, it had been reported is a funny way to say, you've been talking about it for several weeks. And it's like, yes, we did, because that's what the wrestling news was. Or people being like, I can't believe you guys are what's the word I'm looking for? Like going against what you'd reported before. It's like, we don't report news. We are reporting what other people have reported. That's what we're an aggregator, and we put it in the form of a hopefully not too long, entertaining YouTube video. That's what the WrestleTalk channel is about. Yeah. Is we aggregate the news and we make it into a fun little digestible bit. The idea being that it's a bit of fun to watch, it's slightly entertaining when we have our personalities injected into the news, and also it's a very quick way to catch up on the big wrestling news stories of the day, because there's so much wrestling news all the time. Yeah. So it's just an easy way to catch up with it. That is the point of the WrestleTalk news. And a lot of people take that to say, we're reporting all of these stories. And it's like that media literacy, like we say again, they're not listening to the words that we say. We say, as reported by Fightful Select, or according to Dave Meltzer on the Wrestling Observer Radio. They just see the quote that we put on the screen, or they hear the words that we say about the report, and they go, they have said that. Mm-hmm. And that is just a line that just isn't being connected at all, and gets lost in all of this.
We are lumped within the same dirt sheet
category. We are the dirt sheets now.
Although we are like the total opposite of what that is, because they are, like, Sean does incredible work of going out and getting as much information as he can do about one story before he puts it out.
Absolutely.
There, which is, I think, is actually quite a new trend within wrestling media, because previously it has been that, like, if you go back and read old Observers and stuff, it's like, I've been told this and this, and then you follow through, it's like, well, actually 2 more people have told me this.
Yeah.
Whereas Sean will have just got his 4 sources together, and they'll be like, and then I write one big article to write what all of this is. And I think it is unfair. And we don't do that.
No.
Like, we piggyback off the hard work that he has done to put it together into a bite-sized chunk so that everyone can get every bit of news out there as possible. So I will never take credit for anything that Sean does.
No.
But in the same way that I don't understand the way people think I am doing what Sean does.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's a weird disconnect that because we are talking about wrestling news, therefore we must be reporting on wrestling news.
Exactly.
And that is not the same thing at all.
A news reader on the news is not, like, the person presenting the news then throws to a reporter.
Yes.
They will read, here is the information, now I throw to a reporter, and the reporter tells you a bit more color about that.
Yeah.
That news reader there is essentially what we are.
Yes.
In a way.
Yes.
And then we're sort of throwing to someone else to give us the sort of the color information here.
And the only difference between that is it's within the same company.
Yes.
So you have a presenter and the reporter in the same company, whereas we are not in the same company.
No.
We're just taking the reporter's work and putting it into our video.
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
It. Yeah.
I think it's kind of a messy situation, and I think the key to it here, and it's a words that we've used a lot in all of this, is media literacy. And how, because wrestling news, I find it to be a very interesting thing, because wrestling for me is the only industry in the world that is reported on exactly the same way that every other industry is reported on, whether that be politics, whether that be actual news, whether that be sports, whether that be film, whether that be music. But it's the only one that thinks it's special enough to not be reported like that. Yeah. Because very rarely do you see, like, movie stars or film stars having a pop at Variety or the Hollywood News or anything like that for reporting the exact same sort of things that get reported in wrestling news. But wrestlers, and I've spoken to wrestlers that think that it's unfair that wrestling news gets reported like this. And I mean, Bischoff and Pritchard have made podcasts that are dedicated to this subject, that it's unfair that they report on the things that we're trying to do backstage, and they just make stuff up.
Because it's an insider industry. It's always been so protective of everything that's going on within the industry.
We're marks.
We're marks.
They use that same word that con men use for their victims. That's what we are, marks. Yeah. We are people who have been targeted and are being worked and fooled.
Reporting on wrestling news of things that are happening backstage is exposing the business that you're not supposed to see. it is still in the mindset of this is a thing that only the insiders can know about and nobody outside can understand how wrestling works. And we're not in that anymore. People understand a lot more about what happens in the backstage goings on. We understand that shows are booked and predetermined, and we understand backstage politics and contracts and people signed to companies and deals and all this stuff. We understand a lot more about that now. So it's not in the same area. And when we have news reporting on backstage goings on in companies, it's the same as the rest of the world in terms of news reporting, but the people within the wrestling industry, some of them anyway, are still very protective of that environment and being like, no, this is our little wrestling bubble and we must protect it from outsiders. And yeah, I don't know, it's just a people aren't on the same wavelength when it comes to the wrestling industry.
Yes, it's frustrating again in a lot of senses, because you look at something that people like to compare pro wrestling to sports a lot of the time. And there are examples where sports is much more forthcoming with information than pro wrestling is. If it's just a matter of this player has been signed to a contract for this amount of years for this amount of money. You know what their salaries are.
Mm-hmm.
So there's more information available to the entire public. So you might not have as much of a reason to doubt the reporters in that sense. That same information is not given willingly to the public in pro wrestling most of the time, unless Tony Khan goes on a show and says this person signed to this amount of term, and even still, maybe that's not completely accurate. Who knows? He's a busy man. I'm sure he's got a lot on his mind. But I think it is pretty unfair on the media, and I don't want this to be a woe is us, where are the actual victims of things, because that's not the take.
It's not.
You know, that's absolutely not the take. But it is a very difficult job and topic to report on for those who do it, because you have to dig more for that information. You do have to sift through people that will just openly lie to you, and sift through sources, which I know Fightful Select in particular has done extensively. They don't report things from bad sources. There's no reason to, and they're smart enough to filter those bad sources out before it gets to a report. But at the same time, there's so much less information that is readily available to them, and by extension, readily available to the public. And if the public is able to look at a larger scope of information that you can more or less know to be true, they have less of a reason to distrust different aspects of this. Whereas wrestling fans are more than happy to distrust any and all sources because they don't know that. They haven't been told that from the horse's mouth. I think it's very difficult. It's very, very complicated.
I think Pritchard has a lot to answer for this. Because I think the early days of Something to Wrestle was Bruce Pritchard saying, oh, Dave Meltzer's wrong 100% of the time.
Yeah.
And he, I think, was one of the first big prominent people to tar wrestling media, big Bucky O'Hare is here, wrestling media as a bunch of lies. And I think Bischoff has done the exact same thing with his podcast, to be like, everything that Brian Alvarez wrote in Death of WCW was all lies because he wasn't there. So you then start to paint this argument of, if you were not there, you do not know what the actual story was. Even though there's a lot of people that will have backed up what happened in Death of WCW, and there are a lot of people that who were there. And a lot of people who back up what Dave Meltzer reported back in the day in the Wrestling Observer, who were there. But it is that sort of, like you were saying, and you were saying about that protective aspect of like, well, we can't have wrestling media be this thing that actually does expose this. And I think that a lot of that then has bred this idea within wrestling fans that all wrestling media is bad, and that then no one trusts anything. And that's why when something like this happens, Sean is the one that gets attacked by it, even though that Sean has actually done nothing but good reporting on this scenario, to be that you made up every single thing that you wrote here. And you're a bad person because you did that. And then that means that, so kind of like the wrestling industry in a way almost wins, because they are just breeding mistrust amongst anyone who is trying to report on these topics.
Yeah.
I think it's, again, very important there, relating the situation to people like Bischoff and Pritchard. And again, I don't want to harp too much on Malachi Black for his words, because again, as we've said, this is a very difficult situation,
Absolutely.
to talk about in general. But he does say it's all fake or something to that effect. Like, it's all, if you don't hear from me, it's all lies. But you will look at a Fightful Select report and be like, well, which of these words are lies? And it's difficult to find any. And to just say it's all fake, it's all lies, that's not fair to the ones that aren't lying to people.
I've said this about Pritchard's podcast multiple times, but there, like, Conrad Thompson will read out a paragraph of The Observer, and then Pritchard will write back and be like, "That's true, that's true, that's true, that's true, but that's wrong. So 100% of it is false."
Yeah,
and like
baffling.
It is right. So you'd be like, "Yeah, you just said that 80% of what was written there was correct, but this 20% wasn't. So 100% of it is now incorrect." And that, I think, it breeds that media illiteracy.
100%. And I think that the sentiment behind that, maybe originally, it was in essence to protect kayfabe, because there's a lot of the dirt sheets that will report on stories that are happening or swerves that are coming up, because we've seen it's happened in history where the dirt sheets have come up with, they've discovered an angle's going to happen. So then, well, we got to change our plans. We need to because we need to swerve the media, because the media can't be right. It's exposing our business. And I think that kind of sentiment of them discovering a story that's going to happen, so we have to change our plans, is them just protecting their own kayfabe and being like, well, you actually don't know anything because you're not here, is a very reactive move on the wrestling industry part. And I think that's where that sentiment began, and now it's just grown into, you shouldn't know anything about the inside workings of wrestling.
I mean, look at how much crap Dave Meltzer has gotten just for the phrase "plans changed."
Yeah.
Because
I was going to say, because the crap is called for the third man.
yeah, that's a very good example. But Dave would report something and say, "This is planned for such," and then a week later, things would change, because again, at this time, you had a 70-some-year-old man who changed his mind every single week.
Yep.
But people would rather go with the narrative that Dave Meltzer gets everything wrong than, no, plans probably did in fact change. And it's not just him covering his ass with a quick line to say, like, yeah, plans changed. I don't understand that line of thinking. And I would, again, it all goes back to media literacy and just being able to read the exact word. Because again, I would bet that 99.9% of the people who say that do not read the words in The Observer that he's reporting.
Oh, absolutely not. And actually, I think Stephen Larson, they made it a really good mission of theirs this year, and it's something that I've actually trying to do as well. It's to listen to things. So if you say, like Bobby Fish on his podcast when he was talking about CM Punk, there are lots of articles that were written up about that, and I could just copy and paste what was written on WrestleTalk.com or take it from somewhere else and just post it into my news script. I was like, well, no, I want to go hear what he said and the context within that he said it within, so that I have a full understanding of what is being said on this show, so that I am doing the most fair and accurate version of retelling of that story for the WrestleTalk news. And I think that's something that people don't tend to do. Like, you're right, they will just take one line from the Wrestling Observer and just be like, this is what Dave is saying. It's like, well, yeah, but that's one thing, but there's actually there's 1,500 other words in this paragraph that you have not taken that actually add so much context onto what is being said here.
Yeah. And I think on top of that as well, there's the element of I've completely lost my train of thought here. It triggered a something when you were talking about listening to something for the news. Come back to me, but I have a thought about something.
The only other thing I wanted to add as well, and this actually ties into website aggregators, which I do, we are a part of. It is and I think Dave is the best example of this. It's the difference between Dave giving an opinion and Dave reporting something.
Yes.
And this happens with Sean as well. And actually happens with like all sort of, like wrestling reports and things like that, is someone just saying like, oh, I think this might be the direction. It's having a guess at where a storyline is going. And then the wrestling aggregator says, like, Dave Meltzer is reporting this is the plan. So I was no, like if you go and listen to the clip, it's just Damien like, yeah, I think this is probably what they'll do.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah, I guess they could be doing something like this. I guess this is happening over here. And it's just him having a chat with a friend. You mentioned this earlier. It's him having a conversational radio show. But people often take some of it out of context to be like, no, he's now reporting this.
Yeah, there isn't a difference because I know, having done that job for a long time, working on WrestleTalk.com as a news aggregator, that there is a difference that I would make a point to put in my reporting, or my writing rather, that there's a difference between Dave Meltzer reported ... and Dave Meltzer speculated ... But a lot of the readers do not consider those two things differently. Yeah. They just say Dave Meltzer said ... and then it's all the same.
I actually, it's a hard one to defend because he did put it in a really bad way. The Peyton Royce thing from years back was something that was hugely taken out of context.
Yeah.
And I think purposefully so, to make him look like the bad guy, because I think WWE at that point were really on a tear to paint him as a bad guy. Like do you remember the rah-rah speech thing? That is 100% a planted story that WWE gave him so he would report it, so they could then come out and have Seth Rollins be like, look at Dave Meltzer reporting things wrong again. Like, and I think Dave fell for it, and I think he got played massively there.
Just to clarify, by the way, that is Luke speculating about what could happen, not a report from Luke Owen of WrestleTalk.
No, that is
100%. It was this thing. That is speculation.
That is speculation. That is speculation on my part. That is like, because I don't think anyone would ever say what I'd be like as reported by me, because like I know nothing.
Exactly.
I know nothing, Jon Snow. Like I am just a lad with a pretty decent platform that can share some opinions.
Yeah. And that is it. That's it. At the end we don't know anything. That's the thing. Everyone else does the really good reporting. We just take it and then put it into video or podcast form or whatever.
Yeah.
So when we say stuff like, it's definitely this, we're just talking about our opinions. Just wanted to clarify, just in case. That's what we're talking about.
I was going to say, I should have thought of that. You're right, Pete. Right, I think we may have to wrap this up, unfortunately, unless you thought of your point, Pete.
I've lost my point. No, it's gone. It's gone forever. It was about the Bobby Fish stuff. I can't remember what it was.
Anyway, but we are going to wrap this episode up. Thank you so much for watching. Very interested to hear your thoughts on this in the comments down below. One of my favorite things about reading comments left on WrestleTalk podcast videos and WrestleTalk videos are the ones that have been left by people who have watched a video and those who have just commented before they've actually seen any of the contents.
Yeah.
Always fun. But yeah, please do let us know what you thought of this video and this topic in particular. And join us again next week for another edition of the Blackpool Content Club. What's coming up next? So tomorrow it's you two doing SmackDown, right? SmackDown and Rampage?
Yes. Yeah, that's happening.
That is happening.
Yeah.
What's happening on SmackDown this week?
It's a good question. You always ask me this at the end of the show. And we've gone through the SmackDown whatever, look at it on the WWE.com site, and we're just like, I don't know. Some stuff. The Bloodline will probably do a thing.
Yeah, there's nothing. It looks like nothing promoted for next week's show.
But we are recording this on Thursday, we should note, in case there's anything we announced on a Friday.
Sheamus to challenge Gunther.
That's next week. That's the week after.
That's the week after.
Yeah,
that's the premiere thing.
Yes, it is.
Season premiere. Extreme Rules Go Home show. Same thing.
But that'll be the review going up tomorrow. And then myself and Professor Dan Layton will be reviewing Raw next Tuesday. Have a great weekend, everyone. I've been Luke Owen, DAD. That has been Chopper P. Quinnell. That has been your Jam That Champion Tempest. We've been the Blackpool Content Club. That was wrestling. Jam That Jam.